Hello everyone, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. To start the show, let's do a quick recap of everything that's been going on because a lot has happened. Lori Lightfoot lost her bid for her second term as mayor of Chicago. These two banks in California and New York both collapsed, forcing the FDIC to step in to protect those with assets in said banks. Boy Meets World actor Ben Savage announced his bid for Congress. And recently, former President Paul Potbelly has faced the most legally devastating news.
Donald Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, making his second appearance tomorrow before a New York grand jury. He's the key witness in a case investigating a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. That payment made just days before the 2016 election. Prosecutors handling the case are signaling that a criminal indictment for Trump could be coming soon.
That's right. We are about to witness the first ever indictment of a former US president, which in this case you assume was going to happen, but didn't know how soon, like Zendaya's second album, or a Pixar sequel. And all this stems from the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels in 2016 to keep quiet about an alleged sexual affair, something that the former president denies, but a payment that Michael Cohen has since pled guilty to and recently finished serving his 3-year sentence in prison. But of course, getting an indictment against the former president would be an easy thing for a grand jury to do. In fact, it's so easy for a grand jury to levy an indictment against someone that there's now a commonly used phrase by lawyers when discussing such an indictment.
There's the old line about how, a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. Is Donald Trump a ham sandwich? I don't know.
Okay, so the answer to the question, is the former president a ham sandwich, is up for debate, but I'm going to go ahead and say yes. He's a ham sandwich that was left out in the sun for too long and started growing mold that for some reason is both golden and fuzzy. Also, you can indict a ham sandwich? If that's the case, can you also cross-examine a ham sandwich? I'm going to settle this debate right now, so please, if you will, come with me. Okay, Mr. Ham, tell me, where were you the night the president made the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels? Come on, talk, you son of a bitch. Come on, spill the beans. Oh, I see what's going on here. I know exactly what's going on. You answer only to the rough stuff, huh? You like that? Yeah, you like that? Mm. 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 Yeah. Guilty. He's definitely guilty. Now, I'm sure we're going to get a lot more information about this case, along with the case in Fulton County, Georgia, regarding the former president's attempts to overturn his election loss in the state. But instead, we are going to dive straight in with the subject of our story this week, Ron DeSantis, Florida's governor and the only state governor with a second job as a museum wax figure. I know what you're thinking. Didn't you do a piece on DeSantis already? Well, yes, I did. I did one DeSantis 2 years ago, but I'm doing an update piece on DeSantis for a number of reasons. The primary reason being he's more and more in the news recently. He recently appointed political loyalists to a new board to provide oversight of Disney's special tax district in the state. He's also released a new book ironically titled The Courage to Be Free, and he put out this ad that sure looks like a teaser to a presidential bid.
Florida is proof positive that we, the people, are not destined for failure.
DeSantis wins. He has made a promise, and he's making good on the promise.
Florida is leading the nation. Decline is a choice. Success is attainable. And freedom is worth fighting for.
Okay, so there's a lot there, but Florida is proof positive that we, the people, are not destined for failure? I'm not so sure about that, Ron. You're governor of a state that exports weird news stories like, and these are real, a man stealing a crossbow by shoving it in his pants, another man being arrested for drug possession after getting trapped in a porta potty, a man who stole a truck to drive to a Space Force base to warn about an imminent battle between space aliens and dragons, not to mention a guy who was arrested for assaulting a police officer with a hot dog. We the people may not be destined for failure, but people in Florida are, for whatever reason, magnetically drawn towards it. Now this all absolutely looks like a coordinated rollout to what is sure to be DeSantis' run for president next year, even though he hasn't officially announced, because Florida has a resign to run law requiring elected officials to resign from their current office if they want to seek a higher office. Now, despite not officially announcing, he's already a favorite candidate among some conservatives who wish to move on from the former president. And after his landslide re-election win back in November, the New York Post dubbed him the future, which is the worst. And at one conservative group's convention, he received this cringy introduction from failed GOP candidate for governor of Arizona, Carrie Lake.
What he's got, I don't know if you heard of this, but he's got BDE. Anybody know what that means? Ask your kids about it later.
Okay, that's just terrible, but if you don't know what BDE is, please, please, please do not ask your kids about it later. In fact, I'll tell you what that is right here, right now. BDE is an acronym that stands for Big Dick Energy, a kind of term that references a magnetic confidence. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a big dick, or a dick at all for that matter. There are plenty of people who exude BDE, like Bryan Cranston, Bender from Futurama, that one antlered deer that sounds like Ashton Kutcher, and Kevin Hart. Does that make sense to you? Please come to me, and not your children, if you have any more questions about penis-related slang. Nevertheless, you cannot exactly make a prediction about a presidential election that's just 20 months away. After all, several historic early frontrunners have burned out, from Howard Dean, Hillary Clinton, and Gary Hart on the left, and Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, and Rudy Giuliani on the right, the latter of whom is, I assume, currently wandering around aimlessly in Palm Beach, shouting about voter fraud to an unsuspecting flock of pelicans. And DeSantis will eventually have to go up against the former president, which history has shown is no walk in the park. Now, initially, the former president failed to land a schoolyard bully-style nickname with the pathetically lame label of Ron DeSanctimonious. He later unveiled a nickname that had the potential to be much more catchy.
Trump has spent weeks trying to goad DeSantis into a fight, describing him in conversations as Meatball Ron.
Yeah, reportedly, he was calling him Meatball Ron, and I hate to say it, but the former president is kinda on the nose there. It's stupidly immature, hurtful, and hilarious in ways that it's difficult to articulate. Also, it's a really good nickname on its own. If you had to ask me what a Meatball Ron would look like, I'd say probably a cartoon drawing of a meatball with stick arms and stick legs, mustache, maybe voiced in a low-budget direct-to-streaming movie that feels like a VeggieTales copycat version, and somehow anti-Italian. But if you showed me a picture of this guy, I would say, forget what I just said, that guy is my Meatball Ron. And that's not the only nickname he's used. He's also experimented with other nicknames like Ron Dishonest and Tiny D, the latter of which sounds like a name for a rapper whose lyrics always, in one way or another, sound wildly anti-Semitic. But whatever the label he's given, the fact is, Tiny D is still considered a seriously strong contender for the GOP presidential nomination. And while some in the media try to frame him solely in opposition to the former president, essentially calling him the former president with a brain, that's not in any way, shape, or form meaningful. It's like saying that the new Italian restaurant is better than this stromboli I found on the sidewalk. I mean, sure, but you're not exactly giving me any useful information to work with here. So if I may quote Tom Brady's publicist while reviewing pictures of him golfing, let's take the former president out of the picture here. And this week, let's discuss Ron DeSantis and revisit his record and discuss what he's done for, and in some cases to, the 20 million people living in his state. Because it's often less than he brags about, it's less than his detractors say, and actually potentially worse than you might realize. And unlike our first segment on DeSantis, we're not going to get into his early life too much. The short version was he was born and raised in Florida, he was a standout baseball player, and got to the Little League World Series with his local baseball team. He then went to college at Yale and Harvard Law School, and later joined the U.S. Navy as an attorney. Eventually, he married his wife, Casey, despite the single most bizarre dating tactic I've ever heard any guy use. According to someone who knew DeSantis, he would reportedly tell the woman he was on a date with that he likes eating Thai food, but he would pronounce it thigh. And if they corrected him, he would come up with an excuse to leave the date because, and I quote, he didn't want a girlfriend who corrected him, to which I would say, wow. Just imagine being that girl on a date with a guy like that. You go out to dinner, and out of nowhere, he's just eating a Thai restaurant by saying, I really like eating Thai food. And you look at him and think, did you just call Thai food Thai food? I must have misheard him. But then he says he knows a great Thai food restaurant nearby while staring at you so intently that he's almost studying your reaction. You then politely ask him, "Do you mean Thai food, like food from Thailand?" And then his face instantly goes blank and he says, "Sorry, I forgot I have an emergency matter to deal with," and then leaves, leaving you with both the dinner check and perhaps the juiciest worst date story I could hear anyone ever tell. Now, before joining the Navy, he bounced around with several jobs, ranging from being an assistant teacher at a boarding school in Georgia to doing consulting work for the fast food chain Sonic. And we'll go back to details about the former later. Then, fast forward to 2012. He was elected to Congress from Florida, where he was a founding member of the House Freedom Caucus and developed a reputation of being socially awkward when with everyday people, with one former colleague saying he always had his earbuds in to keep people away. Now, if you're picking up a theme of DeSantis not liking hearing the sound of anyone's voice but his own, you're actually onto something. Because ever since he became governor, he's made shutting down voices of dissent something of a central characteristic of his political brand. Just watch this campaign ad he issued last year, where he supposedly shows off how he battles the media with a popular movie theme to it.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your governor speaking. Today's training evolution, dogfighting, taking on the corporate media. Number one, don't fire unless fired upon, but when they fire, you fire back with overwhelming force. Does it say that in the bill? I'm asking you to tell me what's in the bill. Number two, never ever back down from a fight.
If I could complete the question, though.
So you're going to give a speech or ask a question? Number three, don't accept their narrative. It's wrong. It's a fake narrative. I just disabused you of the narrative, and you don't care about the fact.
Wow. Until about a minute ago, I was hoping to see Top Gun Maverick, and now I'm completely convinced it's one of the worst movies I think anyone has ever produced, and I have seen the remake of My Bloody Valentine. Now, DeSantis is constantly complaining about how the media is always taking him out of context, but it's worth noting, in that ad you just saw, he's taking out some important context from the media. Take the clip you saw at the end where he said, "Are you going to give a speech or a question?" If you look at the start of that exchange, you'll notice that only one person is being combative there.
What has gone wrong with the rollout of the vaccine that we've seen phone lines jammed, websites crashing?
There's a lot of demand.
And
I mean, I think at the end of the day, excuse me.
If I could finish my question.
You just said what has gone wrong, so I'm answering the question.
If I could complete the question, though.
So you're going to give a speech or you're going to ask a question?
With all due respect, Governor,
you asked the question, I'm going to answer it.
I'm trying to finish my question.
No, you're giving a speech. You asked the question.
I am trying to ask you the...
You're going to ask how many questions? You get three? They only got one question. Why do you get three?
With all due respect, Governor, I'm just asking if I could finish my question.
You didn't. You finished the question.
No, she didn't. And all she's doing is asking for some basic accountability. When you see that video in context, that's a pretty disgusting case of someone who's meatball-splaining to a journalist who's just trying to do her job. Though, I want to be clear here. DeSantis may rail against the media constantly, but he doesn't hate all media. Because there's one notable exception, and it's the exact one you are thinking of. DeSantis is on Fox News all the time, morning, day, and night. Even by Republican standards, the mutual affection between DeSantis and Fox is totally creepy. Within a 4-month period, Fox asked DeSantis to appear on their network's airwaves around 113 times, or nearly once a day. And at one point, a Fox producer offered to let DeSantis pick the subject matter to discuss if he agreed to come on, which is just A, Fox being pathetically thirsty, and B, proving once again that Fox News is not a news network, but an entertainment/propaganda network. Think of it like this. If Fox went on a date with DeSantis, they would never correct him when he calls it Thai food. Now, he is essentially another talking head for the network, but on the network, he sells himself as someone with a proven track record, and he's done some very terrible stuff. For instance, at his urging, his state's medical board banned gender-affirming care for minors and signed a 15-week abortion ban into law, while recently confirming he signed a 6-week ban if it landed on his desk. Now, here's the thing. Lots of Republican governors have done stuff like that, but what makes DeSantis extra popular on the right is his overzealous willingness to wage big and completely symbolic culture wars. He's almost routinely bragged about making Florida the freest state in America while claiming to be fighting against the biggest scourge of our time.
Wokeism is really a form of cultural Marxism. The wokeism is the new religion of the left. We are not and will never, ever surrender to the woke mob.
Florida is where woke goes to die.
Okay, so let me just say, Florida is not where woke goes to die. It's where wealthy Midwesterners and Upper East Side New Yorkers go to die. Do more research there. Second, DeSantis says the word woke so much, it begins to lose all meaning. And like most conservatives, he doesn't even bother to publicly define what the word woke even means. But if you want help determining what the term actually means, he can just ask his lawyers that, because they specifically define what the term means in court, saying that the word woke means, quote, the view that there are systemic injustices in American society and they need to have policies that address them, which is a hell of a thing to admit that you are against. DeSantis should probably consider investing in a lawyer who's more than willing to lie for him. I actually think that there's a lawyer currently near South Beach in a park somewhere, leaking from the head and engaging in a shouting match with a pelican. He shouldn't be too hard to find. His voice can be heard across the neighborhood, and he's soggy. Now, DeSantis spends a lot of time in his capacity as governor decrying wokeness and airing right-wing grievances through virtue signaling. One example of him doing just that involves the case of Leah Thomas, a trans woman who won an event in an NCAA swimming championship. The girl who finished in second place happened to be a Florida resident, which DeSantis took as an opportunity to come out and pull this shit.
What the NCAA has done by allowing basically men to compete in women's athletics, in this case the swimming, you had the number one woman who finished was from Sarasota. We're going to be doing a proclamation saying that Emma is the best female swimmer in the 500-meter freestyle because she earned that.
Alright, so aside from being so disgusting and repulsive in that moment, it's worth noting that DeSantis does not have the power to declare or disqualify winners in college sports, rendering that proclamation completely meaningless. But since straight white guys are using their platforms to invalidate past achievements out of pure spite, I hereby declare that by signing this document, Ron DeSantis' Little League team did not, in fact, ever make it to the Little League World Series, and said his team's place will be henceforth be taken by the Season 2 cast of Euphoria. I declare it. It is written. It is done. Now, I'll also hereby declare that by signing this other document, Tom Holland did not in fact win the 2022 Kids' Choice Award for Favorite Movie Actor, and said his win will be henceforth taken by Dwayne Johnson for Jungle Cruise. I have declared it. It is written. It is done. Now, but DeSantis goes much further than making bigotry-driven proclamations. DeSantis has signed a bunch of attention-grabbing legislation that's seemingly and solely designed to delight conservatives and rile up his base, as well as enrage liberals and progressives. And while these bills get a huge amount of attention when they're announced and get a lot of media coverage, the actual implementation of them can be scrutinized a lot less. Take what DeSantis calls his anti-riot law, which he and Republican-controlled state legislature passed following the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. The law strengthens criminal penalties for those who were deemed rioters at protests, and DeSantis loves to brag to conservative groups about just how mad it's made people.
And I have to say, brag a little bit, our anti-riot legislation was recently criticized by the United Nations, so I wear that as a badge of honor.
Well, okay then. But being chastised by the UN isn't a positive thing. What other admonitions would fill DeSantis with a weird sense of pride? I was also criticized by the Anti-Defamation League. Burger King called me a douchebag, and Zendaya said she would kick me in the balls if she ever got the chance. So I wear that as a badge of honor. And by the way, if Zendaya ever did kick Ron DeSantis in the balls, this is probably the face he would make when her foot makes forceful contact into his tiny D. But it wasn't just the UN that had a problem with that law. A federal judge issued a preliminary injunction blocking a key part of it from being enforced, arguing that it could effectively criminalize legally protected speech and that it was, quote, vague to the point of unconstitutionality. The same thing happened to his Stop Social Media Censorship Act, which also got a huge amount of attention when he first signed it. It threatened social media platforms with fines for banning political candidates, and he proposed it right after a number of them had been panned the former president in the wake of January 6th because of, you know. But that law is also under a preliminary injunction from a federal judge who at one point told DeSantis' lawyers, quote, I won't put you on the spot and ask if you ever dealt with a statute. That was more poorly drafted. But DeSantis is still fighting these lawsuits, and future decisions could potentially go his way, since these lawsuits are being appealed in higher courts that range from moderately conservative to overturned Roe v. Wade. And when DeSantis does have the laws on his side, his application of them can be appalling. Last year, he created an Elections Crime and Security Office and made a big show of how they spearheaded the arrest of 20 people who had voted illegally. But the people that were arrested were ones that had been cleared to join the voter rolls, assuming they were eligible to vote, even though they technically weren't. Now, one way to deal with it would have been to reach out to those people and let them know about this mistake and remove them from the rolls. Instead, what DeSantis decided to do was send armed police officers to conduct arrests with body cam footage revealing police with guns drawn, pulling people out of their homes. And if you listen to the officers conducting the arrests, even they feel annoyed and dirty about what they're being made to do.
This shit on me, like, they wanted to plan a recounting operation in 4 hours.
I ain't commit no fraud.
Well, so that's the thing. I don't know exactly what happened with it, but you do have a warrant. That's what it's for.
Why is y'all doing this now and this happened years ago?
I don't know. I have no idea, man.
Holy shit. Do you have any idea how shady your order has to be for officers to enforce it reluctantly? Enforcing laws on scared people is one of their favorite things to do. It's that, make siren go wee-woo, enjoy discounts on or free food, and end of list. Now since then, all those cases have since been dropped or dismissed, but it feels like DeSantis' aim there was to just instill fear, whether it's making people afraid to protest, or moderate content online, or even just vote. Even his sloppily written laws can cause serious damage, and look no further than the passage of HB 1557, named the Florida Parental Rights and Education Act, also known as the Don't Say Gay Law, though DeSantis says that name pushes a false narrative and insists that the bill, before he pushed to expand it, simply said no sexual instruction in pre-K through 3rd grade. But the bill is not narrow as that in its language at all, as this one former Republican candidate for Congress and supporter of DeSantis openly acknowledged.
But the bill is a sweeping, general piece of legislation that doesn't just apply to young children, it applies throughout the entire school age, where it says age-appropriate teaching of gender identity and sexuality.
So the bill, it does, you're right, it targets kindergarten to 3rd grade, and it says, or age-appropriate.
Yeah. So when is it age-appropriate to talk about homosexuality?
It varies by the individual.
You would sue a teacher if they started talking to your daughter about same-sex marriage or LGBTQ issues at the age of 17?
If they don't have my consent and I think it's not appropriate for my daughter, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would be quite shocked to hear that.
Well,
because it's kind of a mainstream...
That is the law.
Now, that's a hard pill to swallow, but he's technically right there. Thanks to Ron DeSantis, that is now the law in Florida. Also, it's kind of ridiculous how people who think homosexuality is a concept to be taught at an appropriate age don't give a single thought to when they teach their kids about heterosexuality. Oh, I might be mistaken. Maybe that guy's kid asks her every day, "Who are you two people living in my house?" And he answers, my name is Dad, and that lady is Mom, and we're close friends. And now, don't ask me about this anymore, or I will see your ass in court. But sexuality isn't the only thing in DeSantis' crosshairs, as he's also passed what's known as the Stop Woke Act, a law in Florida that limits the ways concepts related to systemic racism and sex discrimination can be discussed in schools. And if you listen to DeSantis put it, laws like the Stop Woke Act are badly needed because the alleged epidemic of wokeness in schools goes far deeper than people think.
I have math books sent to my Department of Education for review, these textbooks, and they will do things like woke math. And I'm thinking to myself, 2 + 2 = 4. It's not 2 + 2, well, let's have a struggle session over that. How do you feel about it? No. There's a right answer here.
Out of context there, he is kind of right. Numbers don't have feelings. But if they did, this number would be sad, this one would be spaced out and giggly, this one would make us all laugh, this one would make us laugh even harder, this one would make us laugh probably the hardest, and this one would be exciting at first, but then the novelty will wear off and it gets really tired and physically sore. Now, DeSantis essentially claimed that his state's Department of Education had to reject math textbooks for containing indoctrinating concepts like race essentialism for elementary school students, which is a big claim to make. And if you think that sounds like bullshit, that's because you're right. It is. Reporters for these two news outlets combed through thousands of pages of math textbooks and their reviews, and they couldn't find any such examples. And when the DeSantis administration did eventually produce 4 snippets of what they claimed were examples of objectionable content, there was nothing in them that explicitly mentioned race. But one snippet did suggest practice with empathizing with others, while they complete a lesson objective of identify numbers from 1 to 5 in sequence. That is it! His big claim of woke math and race essentialism in grade schools is essentially regular math and teaching your kids not to be a bunch of tiny assholes. That's the kind of education DeSantis could have benefited from in grade school, because it seems his solution to the problem of figuring out the difference between 1 and 3 questions from a reporter is basically yell at the top of your lungs until the other person just stops talking. And the most recent thing you've probably heard about is books being pulled from school library shelves across the state, with images like these going viral online. And in classic fashion, DeSantis has pushed back on those images using the former president's favorite attack line.
I tried to create in Florida a narrative. It's basically a book ban hoax. It's a hoax what they're doing. And they're trying to say that because we have parental rights and because we have curriculum transparency, if you have a book that has hardcore pornography for in a library that 10-year-olds can access, a parent objects to that, that does not satisfy Florida standards. It should not be in the library with those young kids. And I think 99% of parents agree with.
Alright, let's debunk what he just said there, because 99% of parents don't agree on anything at all. That's just a basic fact. Second, to be fair to DeSantis here, some misinformation has been circulating online about these book bans. For example, there was this list of what were supposedly books banned statewide in Florida, circulated widely, but it's not true. None of those books have been challenged nor banned in Florida schools. Now, having said that, those images of covered or empty bookshelves are very much real, not because these schools are pushing some false narrative, but because they're trying to figure out how to comply with DeSantis' incredibly stupid law. And while DeSantis might call this an overreaction because those books will return once they're approved, not all of them will. Because of DeSantis' Don't Say Gay bill and the Stop Woke Act, he has turbocharged a campaign by conservatives to get rid of books because they simply don't like them, which goes far beyond removing hardcore pornography or the usual give and take between parents and school boards that's been commonplace for decades. What DeSantis has done is make it easier for anyone in a community to challenge these books. The most notable example of this came from Florida's Escambia County, where one teacher challenged over 100 books. Among them were titles like And Tango Makes 3, a picture book based on a true story of 2 male penguins at the Central Park Zoo who raised a baby chick together. And one of her apparent objections to that book was that a second grader could read it and think these 2 male penguins are lovers. Now, there was recently a school board meeting in that county to address challenges against 3 of those books, including the Penguin book. Now, multiple community members came to testify in favor of banning it, and they made explicitly clear which state law emboldened them to push for this book to be banned.
I wouldn't even talk about this book except for right and wrong is a clear line, and it's not gray, so it is black and white. It's black and white with the law when we talk about HB 1557, because we're talking about indoctrination. And when you look up this book on Destiny Discover on the schools and county website, the book says this book is about 2 male penguins that fall in love. Jesus said, go and sin no more. So this, it's against the law. Thank you.
Think about how much work that guy had to put into that testimony. He would have had to clean himself up, dress up like he always wears office clothes that are 2 sizes too big, go to that meeting, and give a speech about how mad he is about the concept of gay penguins. You have to admire his tenacity there to be a completely ignorant douchebag. And the problem is, that ignorant douchebag won. The school board voted at that meeting to ban the Penguin book from its schools. And when you take all this together, the push to ban books, the inane and pointless proclamations to shame the LGBTQ community, the sloppy attempts to criminalize protesters, and combine it with the abortion bans, the bans on gender-affirming care, it really seems like Florida is less like the freest state and more like the freest state for Ron and company, but not for thee. So the question is, what will become of DeSantis? Well, there's already signs that some Republicans believe that he is not built for the national stage, despite being a favorite among conservatives who wish to move on from the former president. One of those areas to look at would be DeSantis' policies, more specifically embraced by him and his party in the state. The Florida GOP introduced a number of extreme bills this session alone to do things like, among other things, outlaw the Democratic Party of Florida, to ban girls from talking about their periods in schools, roll back gun restrictions that were put in place in response to the Parkland shooting in 2018, and even criminalize being an undocumented immigrant or even associating with one. And sometimes, some of these extreme policies DeSantis champions and implements can sometimes blow up in his face. You're probably thinking of his tax credits he gave to Floridians to keep their gas stoves in response to a potential ban on new gas stoves by the Biden administration, despite the fact that no such ban has ever been proposed and that 9 in 10 Florida residents use electric stoves. But that is minor compared to what his champion initiatives have done. Just like his social media censorship and anti-riot bills, DeSantis' Stop Woke Act was issued a preliminary injunction by a federal judge back in August, who said that the Stop Woke Act was, quote, positively dystopian, and said that under this law, the state government would have unfettered authority to muzzle its professors in the name of freedom. That same judge eventually issued a restraining order blocking the state from enforcing it, and recently, a federal appeals court also blocked the Stop Woke Act from being enforced in Florida's public colleges. Now, another area of policymaking where DeSantis' initiatives have blown up in his face revolve around immigration. Aside from that immigrant ban bill I mentioned, DeSantis also put in place a program that would transport migrants out of Florida and to liberal jurisdictions like Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, where authorities there were not warned ahead of time that migrants were being transported there and lured migrants to take said trips under the idea that migrants would be given housing and jobs upon arrival, even though they weren't. And the problem was, these migrants didn't originally come to Florida, instead came to Texas, and were trafficked out of San Antonio to Martha's Vineyard with a stop in Florida between the two. And as a result of that program, DeSantis and his administration are facing investigations by Massachusetts law enforcement, the sheriff of Bayard County, Texas, and even the U.S. Treasury for misallocating money used to aid the Florida economy as a result of the pandemic to fund those migrant flights. And while DeSantis and his administration deny wrongdoing, it doesn't really help the fact that the state is pushing to expand the program. And it's not just his policies becoming landmines for him to step on. DeSantis personally, according to former staffers who worked with him both in Congress and in the governor's mansion, is not built for a national campaign for president. And there's definitely signs of cracks in the armor there. His standing among GOP primary voters is already slipping in recent polls, and a recent poll shows DeSantis losing support among key demographics in his own state. He's also facing questions among Republican politicians about whether or not he can make it past the primary, as he was recently criticized for calling Russia's war with Ukraine a territorial dispute, and those extreme bills Republicans in the state legislature filed and could potentially pass, combined with DeSantis' other actions as governor, like revoking liquor licenses for the Hyatt Regency in Miami or the Orlando Philharmonic over them hosting drag shows, or removing a locally elected prosecutor for choosing to not prosecute cases of abortion, or even actively making Florida's housing affordability crisis and cost of living worse, or even obscuring Florida's transparency laws on public records, DeSantis could risk losing primary elections in states that could be the general election battlegrounds. And even his personal characteristics could be an Achilles heel of his. That earbuds in his ear story isn't the only story of him being socially awkward, or in some cases, politically hypocritical. This brings me back to that boarding school job DeSantis had that I mentioned earlier, specifically at Darlington School in Rome, Georgia. DeSantis loves to decry indoctrinated concepts being taught in schools and rail against alleged sexualization and grooming of young children, but when it comes to his own actions as a person and as governor, his hypocrisy can be made visible upon a closer inspection of his background. During his time there as both a teacher and athletic coach, DeSantis routinely got into debates about the Civil War with other students, sometimes questioning the accuracy of his lessons, and was referred to by some female students as the hot teacher, which I would say, ew. He also reportedly went to parties hosted by students at that school, like in this actual picture of him drinking beer with teenage girls. And it isn't just being an arrogant, cocky jock that people know him for, because DeSantis, according to former aides, had some very disgusting eating habits.
One ex-staffer saying, quote, he would sit in meetings and eat in front of people, always like a starving animal who has never eaten before, getting stuff everywhere. According to two sources familiar with the incident, during a private plane flight 4 years ago, DeSantis enjoyed a chocolate pudding dessert by eating it with 3 of his fingers.
Holy stuff. That is the words of a former political office employee describing the eating habits of a sitting governor as if he were a 3-year-old eating birthday cake at a party with no utensils. 3 fingers to eat pudding. Last time I checked, that's not very sanitary. Now look, in the coming months, you're going to see a lot of comparisons between the former president and DeSantis, and he'll come out well in a lot of them, sometimes by default, but that cannot be the standard here. Because if you had to learn about Ron DeSantis from scratch, without the former president in the picture, or any basis of comparison, what you would see would likely horrify you. Because you would be discovering an American Ceausescu, an albino Maduro, a Huey Long 2.0. What I'm saying is, if you had to learn about DeSantis without the former president in the picture, you would discover DeSantis for what he truly is. A petty wannabe autocrat, a mean-spirited crybully, and a political opportunist. A man with zero interest in hearing any opposing viewpoints, questions about him or his agenda, the correct way to pronounce Thai food, or even the correct way to eat pudding. A man who could best be described as, and I don't use this term lightly, a rotten meatball with a tiny d. That's my show. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Good night.